Hello, welcome back to the Astrology live stream. My name is Nick Dagan Best. I'm an astrologer. His name is Patrick Watson. He's also an astrologer. How you doing, Watson?
I'm good. I'm not used to being on this side of the screen. This is a change from
Yeah, how did this happen?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's okay, but
Yeah,
we can switch it up, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening. I have a question, which is why is it that even though I know I check my camera is shooting in high, in HD, when it gets reposted in clips, either on the Astrology podcast or another little clips that Beth's been doing, my camera looks all fuzzy and out of focus. So that's something I don't really understand why that's happening. Is it because my lighting isn't that bad? And anyway, it shows up on other sort of formats. So
Well,
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to check with that. So just for anyone watching, my wife Beth, you may have seen her post on Twitter. She has very graciously decided to help us a little bit here with like our timestamps, and so you will notice on my YouTube channel where the past streams have gone. You'll see that the descriptions have been sort of updated with timestamps and with pretty new thumbnails, and so things are sort of developing in that way, trying to kind of make some of these streams sort of more accessible. So thank you very much to Beth for doing that.
Indeed.
And,
we are sort of getting our ducks in a row, so to speak. We're outgrowing our sort of
informal
newbie informal kind of casual thing, and we're getting a little more organized and stratified.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, and my complaint was not with Beth or with Chris.
Yeah, no,
I'm wondering aloud. The problem must be on my end. That somehow, even though I think I'm looking into a very clear video picture, when the video gets re-edited, it looks like I'm in, Bin Laden's cave or something. Anyway, I'll have to figure that out. But
so
which
Nick,
I promise you, I've never been.
Speaking of promises, you promised last week that we would talk a little bit about
the Thin White Duke,
job.
the return of the Thin White Duke. I mainly had this one little point to make, which was about the transit of Neptune in Sagittarius. We don't have a time chart for Bowie. We have some ideas, and I'm going to sort of show you some of the options. But yes, let's look at that. Just a moment here. Okay. Sharing the screen, hide that. Open this up. All right. So come to think of it, don't. Here we are, David Bowie. Some of these, it might be a 9:15 birth time, 9:30, this is an 11 p.m. This is a totally different one with Libra rising. And then the 9 a.m. Brixton one, which at one point was quoted from his parents in a biography. Now, we're not going to sort of contrast and compare these times. I just wanted to make a really simple point, something that's true regardless of what time Bowie is born. I'm just going to use this 9 a.m. chart as a sort of default, just to illustrate what we have here. So if he was born at 9 a.m., you would have Venus in Sagittarius on the midheaven, and you would have a 3-degree Aquarius rising with the moon in Leo right on the descendant. The other thing about Bowie's Venus is it's coming out of a retrograde. Bowie's a red 2 rising A. The transit of Neptune through Sagittarius has this very interesting relationship to his career. This is my David Bowie file. There's 210 charts in it. There's, people like his parents, his brother, some of the musicians and managers and people he collaborated with, his eventual second wife, so on and so forth, his son, his solar return. Right. Anyway, coming down here, right up until his death. So I still want to work on this file. There's still a ton more to add to it. But if you just do a search for Neptune and Sagittarius in the chart file, what you get is a timeline going from early 1970 until 1984. And what this period encompasses, this is everything that the only record he's really known for, in his sort of famous years that wasn't recorded when Neptune was in Sagittarius is Space Oddity, which
Right,
was recorded
69.
in 69. Just as interestingly, though, or is it here? Session, June. Yeah, it was recorded like right when the moon landing was happening. And this Mars retrograde on his natal Venus, this Mars retrograde in Sagittarius. That's interesting because we're keeping our eyes on Sagittarius. But basically everything after this song, from like when he marries Angie, and he eventually starts playing with the guys who become the Spiders, and Spiders from Mars, and starts doing the Ziggy Stardust album, and all that period, and then all the sort of Thin White Duke, Brian Eno years, and right up through the starring in The Hunger and doing Let's Dance, and then right up until the Tonight album of 1984. This is the last one that's done with Neptune and Sagittarius, and you can see Jupiter and Capricorn here. Now, what happens right after Neptune leaves Sagittarius is his older brother, Terry, jumps in front of a transit train and takes his life. And this is, you can see, right as Neptune has entered Capricorn, pretty much to the month or so. And the story of Bowie's older brother, Terry, is so important to the Bowie legend. This is his older half-brother, Terry Burns, who's a Scorpio born in 1937. And who, one way or the other, had a Sagittarius moon. So Bowie and Terry, David and Terry, had the same mother, different father. But David's father, who was Terry's stepfather, was really kind of cruel to him, and Terry had mental health issues, really severe ones, and he wound up being institutionalized. And a lot of the stuff that Bowie does, like the song Aladdin Sane, for instance, is about Terry.
Okay.
And a lot of the, this is the funny thing about David Bowie is, he's known so much for this sort of the artifice of his, the way he sort of creates,
Persona.
the personas, the characters, but so much of this is actually to sort of couch the heavy duty trauma he has, to like the guilt he has for Terry. Terry was the musician who got David into playing saxophone and listening to, Charlie Parker. He was like sort of his musical coach, and just, everything a big brother should be. And then, to see sort of Terry fall by the wayside, there's like so much in Bowie's 70s material, particularly, that sort of couched reference to Terry. Aladdin Sane is the most overt one. But it's kind of the interesting, it's not unlike, say, like Pete Townsend from The Who wrote the Tommy, the rock opera, and you think, oh, here's this grandiose production, but he really did it to write about his own, childhood sexual abuse, and like wrote like this whole rock opera as like a kind of, wall to protect himself from exposing something this painful and real and traumatic. And I think you get something very similar with Bowie. And it's just ironic to me that, Terry sort of takes his life right as Bowie's, like, because that Tonight album was like the first kind of, it wasn't entirely a flop. There was a hit single, but it was like the first one where like that sort of that magic that he had all through the 70s into the early
80s
80s.
were not kind to Bowie.
No, exactly. And that Tonight album is just like the first, like, it was successful enough, but it was definitely a drop from Let's Dance. And this was after a 12 years of solid
streak,
of not a wrong note kind of thing, and constantly being ahead of the curve. And ironically, in the 80s, when every other recording artist is a Bowie clone of some kind, I just find that Neptune and Capricorn era really, really interesting. for the way he that's his fall. And then when Neptune goes into Aquarius, that's when he really starts
Has
to
a bit of a
find,
comeback.
yeah, it has a comeback and starts to find himself. There's the 97 anniversary concert and all this stuff. And yeah, he takes it from there. So I do find, and because it's Sagittarius, if that Aquarius birth time is right, so you can just imagine the Neptune transit over that Venus on the midheaven, if it's a 9 a.m. chart.
His
And
emergence
and
as
and
Ziggy Stardust,
that is Ziggy
you know.
Stardust right there. Yeah.
And that's so perfect too. We've talked in a previous stream about how um Uranus is like innovations in music, but like Neptune is like kind of mainstream trends. And so we sort
Yeah,
of contrasted how in the 70s Uranus was in Scorpio, which seems to embody like the punk archetype, whereas Neptune in Sagittarius is more like funk and disco. And I think we can include glam and glam rock
oh,
into that,
absolutely,
and that's
absolutely.
suddenly, it has this sort of idea of I don't know, the idea. I'm not a great I'm not like a music historian or anything, but you have this he sort of embodied this kind of idea of like of freedom, the sort of Sagittarian ideal
Yeah.
of
I mean,
funky freedom.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, coming out as gay when he's not actually sort of technically gay, also kind of an
Well,
interesting
Venus
move
is
there as well.
there, right?
Exactly, exactly.
And he even brought sort of this. Well, I don't know how much of this is necessarily only Neptune, but um, he's widely regarded as being kind of a forerunner of this sort of popularization of like a more androgynous sort of look,
Sure, sure.
um, and so that's
Yeah.
really
But
perfect.
you're right about the mainstream, because I mean, from Ziggy Stardust, you wouldn't have ABBA, not in the clothes that they wound up wearing. Like if you ever look, especially like really early ABBA, they're kind of trying to be, Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, and like what they're wearing and stuff. Like not the makeup and stuff, but it just like, it sort of spanned out from there. And then of course you'll get Alice Cooper, which will turn to Kiss, and it just, sort of
Right.
spirals from there. Next thing you know, it's Kiss meets the Phantom and everything's coming apart. Yeah. So anyway, that was the main thing. I think it was just the conversation about Neptune transiting through the signs that, and I remembered like looking at Bowie in that one sort of context and how interesting it is.
No, absolutely. And I think you have a great point that it would make a lot of sense if his midheaven was, say, in Sagittarius, and if Sagittarius were his 11th with Venus in there, because it would reflect why the Neptune in Sagittarius era would be this kind of more marvelous sort of era of his music, where he is embodying this kind of he's really riding that wave
Yeah,
of of
it, it's not a 10th house career, it's an 11th house career, because he's got these, I mean, he's literally got these, followers all over whose lives are completely changed. They come out of the closet, they change the way they dress, I mean, it really
right.
like it sparks so much. You won't, yeah, you're not going to have punk, goth, new
Right.
romantic, anything. The 80s would have been more plaid and flip haircuts, if like
Right. So then Neptune enters into Capricorn, which would be his 12th house. And as you noted, like that coincided with really like the end of the party. Like
yeah.
such a sobering event in his personal life also seemed to correspond with, this old style somehow being starting to feel a little out of touch. That the hair bands start looking a little more aged,
Right.
and so it's a new kind of Capricornian sort of ethos comes in, where like it's about reflecting kind of the reality society. I feel like that's really interesting too, that Neptune and Capricorn, its emergence into Capricorn in the early 80s seems to coincide with the beginning of the crack epidemic, and we know how like hip hop was really influenced by that, and that's all about sort of grim realities of life, and especially for the hardest hit in society. That's really what Saturn, as the ruler of Capricorn, would seem to kind of bring, this sort of earthy, like and sobering kind of reality. So it's a real. I feel like the switches from Scorpio to Sag and from Sag to Cap, those are some of the most dramatic changes in quality of the weather, as it were, when the planets go through those signs, because it's such a dramatic change from like a Mars ruled sign to a Jupiter ruled sign to a
Mhm.
Saturn ruled sign.
Yeah.
So you really get a sense when the planet moves from Sagittarius into Capricorn, it's like the end of the party. You even kind of get that every year when the moon moves out of when the sun moves out of Sagittarius into Capricorn.
Right. Yeah.
December is like this like fun time where you can preparing for the holidays, and then like the holidays happen and it's kind of like a letdown, and you're in that bleak part of the year where
Yeah.
you know
I mean, that's the whole reason. That's the whole reason you had that solstice celebration in the first
right.
place. It's like, you
Yeah.
know, okay, now we just wait for the sun to come back.
Right.
The other thing that strikes me though, so Neptune goes into Capricorn, and while he doesn't really sort of come back fully until Neptune goes into Aquarius, the period when Uranus goes into Capricorn in the late 80s is when he starts the Tin Machine Band, which is really kind of like this is a new sort of you know, like who's he trying to kid? He's been a solo artist for 2 decades at that point, and suddenly like, yeah, I'm in a band, you know. They're not you know, not a bad band by any stretch, a band I would have been into, and it was a chance on that tour to like see him in a smaller club. The first time I saw him live was barely 2 months before you were born. On the Never Let Me Down tour, which was kind of like I mean, I was grateful to finally see him, but I'd really missed my chance in '83. Alas.
I see.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
then Neptune, go ahead.
yeah, Uranus in Capricorn, he starts Tin Machine, and really like he's influenced by the Pixies. He's influenced by everything that's happened. I mean, he was always really good at that. It's sort of like looking at what's happening and what's the best stuff, you know, being played. And that sort of, you know, gives him a couple of years of being like an underground artist, you know, as he'd like to be. And that's when he gets married in April of '92 at the exact Uranus Neptune conjunction in Capricorn.
Did that happen close to his sun in Capricorn?
Somewhat here.
I can't remember the degree of his sun.
It's fairly close, but no, his sun is a little bit earlier, I believe.
So it is interesting that he went from being kind of like, yeah, like having this sort of mainstream popularity to suddenly kind of being, underground again.
yeah, which I think in his own way he really liked, you know.
Right.
Oops. Okay, here we are. Yeah, it is. It is very, very close to a sun Mars. That's right. I'd forgotten.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, there you go.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's interesting too. Just if you're correct that he's Aquarius rising, then the sun would be the ruler of the 7th house. So he received this like once in a lifetime, once in a century, you know, type of conjunction to his ruler of the 7th house, and he marries
a supermodel.
Right. Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
And they were together for till he died.
Till
the end of his life. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's 24 years, 2 Jupiter cycles, and you know, really kind of turned his life around, I think, at this point.
Yeah.
You know, after a lot of sort of struggle. So that was what made his comeback all the better.
I was gonna say I don't know the ins and outs of like Bowie's life, but didn't he have a lot of like substance abuse struggles?
Particularly in the 70s, yeah.
Okay, mostly in the 70s. Okay, so in a way, Neptune and Capricorn was like getting clean then.
Yeah, I imagine. You know, I certainly by the time, you know, I saw him in '87, he was totally clean. And my understanding is that's it, you know, because he helped Iggy Pop get off drugs earlier in the '80s, like, you know, around the time of Let's Dance. That's the reason China Girl, the song China Girl is on Let's Dance, is because he co-wrote it with Iggy Pop, and the money that Iggy Pop made from the royalties of that being a hit single helped him sort of turn his life around to get off drugs. They had been sort of, you know, drug partners, for want of a better term, in Berlin in the mid 70s, you know, when Bowie was doing Station to Station is the album that he, you know, famously, he can't remember recording it because he was on so much coke. Yeah, that period I think is when he's notoriously sort of at his worst with regard to substances. But really, you know, I can count on my fingers the names of rock musicians who didn't have drug problems in the
Right.
1970s. Their names are Frank Zappa and Ted Nugent, and I don't know anyone else. Uh, you know, that's I wish I were joking.
Right.
Yeah. So, oh, I'm just noticing
So then,
comments. We're getting a lot of comments in
oh
here.
wow,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
yeah, we did.
Okay, so a testicular ultrasound, yeah, that's a Sun Mars cazimi. I get that. Yeah, hope everything's all well and good with your boys. Um,
That's interesting too, because just about a week ago I started the testosterone treatment, which involves that same part of the
your
anatomy.
boys, your boys.
Yeah, so everything's good.
Good.
But yeah, so I know that Scorpio has this kind of when you associated with the genitals, if you go
Yeah,
to the
we can be adults here.
Nautical
It's not.
Body
Yeah.
Association. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. Uh let's see what else have people said here. Andre 3000. Yeah, I did hear he released a new album. I haven't heard it yet.
Yeah, I haven't heard it yet either. I see everyone
I know
talking
he's
about it.
been away for a while. What I was going to say about I was curious to see what you had to say about Neptune going into Aquarius, because the first thing that I sort of remember, what I try to think of that about the when I try to think about the ingress of Neptune to Aquarius, I think of his collaborations with like Trent Reznor, which I think
Yeah.
happened either like right at or just before Neptune's ingress. It
It
might
was
be when Uranus was in
it
Aquarius.
was it was just after. Yeah, they because I believe it was 97. That was
I'm afraid of Americans.
yeah. I'm pretty sure that's
My John Lennon
97.
and my David Bowie impressions are interchangeable.
That was because he
Um,
released the Outside album in September of 95, but which point Uranus was in Capricorn, but it had been in Aquarius. It was on the regress. And Pluto was in Scorpio, but it had been in Sagittarius early in 95. And that's the Outside album. That's the one with Hello Space Boy. But I think that the album you're thinking of is the one after that, which is Earthling, which was released February 4th, 97. Yeah, and that is solidly Uranus in Aquarius, Pluto in Sagittarius.
and that's important to note that Pluto was making the same ingress into the sign that Neptune previously had in
Exactly. Yeah.
1970.
Yeah.
So that gives additional credence to the idea that his midheaven is
Could very
potentially
well
close.
be. Yeah. And
Yeah,
yeah.
could very well be.
And look at all this stuff
Neptune.
here. Yeah. Yeah. This I think of this as being like I mean, Outside was pretty good, but Earthling is quite a step up. This was a funny month, February of 97. I should just talk a little bit about February of 97 since we're here, because you had Mars went retrograde just after the day after this album came out. It went retrograde at 5 Libra, opposite Saturn here in Aries, and then Uranus and Jupiter at 3 to 5 of Aquarius, and Pluto at 5 Sagittarius. So you had these sextiles, trines, sort of all on this. If you see what I'm getting at, Libra, Sagittarius, Aquarius, Aries. You see what I'm talking about?
I don't see the chart, but I'm picturing it.
Oh, you don't? Oh, I thought I was
Oh,
sharing
okay.
my goddamn screen. I'm so sorry. Yeah. We're back to this, and here we promised a smooth professional show. Um, yeah. Is this going to work? Here we are. So this is the release of Earthling. My apologies,
fine.
everyone. So this is February 4th of 97. If we move forward a day, you see Mars goes retrograde there. So Mars retrograde opposite Saturn, sextile these three, and then Pluto here. This was a really, really interesting month.
Yeah, it was.
February of 97, because let's look at people born at this time.
Well, while you're looking that up, I can tell you, something that was happening in my own life at that time. I remember it very distinctly because it was a pretty huge deal for me at the time. Later, I think it was like it would have been in March of 1997. That was when Mars went retrograde in Libra, which was my third
Yeah.
house of siblings. and my brother got into a fight at school, a really serious fight, and because of the way that it had been handled, and because of the situation surrounding my brother getting into this fight, we ended up changing into a different school. We ended up switching schools mid-year, and we went into like a Catholic school, which is very, very different from anything I'd had at the time. Of course, Saturn was in my ninth. Um, and this was also when like my mom was like trying to convert us to Catholicism, because she sort of got a second wind of religious fervor, the second great awakening in
Right.
our lives. But anyway, the but I remember it was March to April of 1997, because I remember it was right around like when Easter would have happened. It was like either right before the Easter break, and so I just realized that Mars retrograde in my third house coincided with
Right.
when we would have made that change in our schooling arrangements, precisely because of my sibling, my brother, who yeah had
Yeah.
got
Gotcha.
Mars retrograded. Even as a
No, for
kid,
sure.
he was only
Sure.
um
Yeah.
only
For
12
me, for
or
me, because
11.
my Mars is at 5 Leo, so all those planets were making trines or oppositions or what have you, or sextiles to my natal Mars, and that was the month that I wound up running off to New York essentially to study astrology with the NCGR quite suddenly. Like I got a ride, and so that was it. I just
Wow.
like went. Um, Bill Clinton, of course,
Oh, yeah,
has the
we've talked about
ascendant at
that
about five.
before. Yeah.
We've talked about all that. I
Yeah.
wanted to quickly show you two nativities from this month. They're both very interesting because they're uh, um, quite new world. First, this is Bailey Jean Cipher. She's the daughter of Melissa Etheridge and Melissa Etheridge's partner. And eventually, we found out that the donating father was David Crosby. I don't know if do you remember this
Okay.
story?
Well, I know Crosby was married to Melissa Etheridge. Oh
No,
no,
no, no, no.
what are you
Melissa
saying?
Etheridge is a lesbian.
Okay.
Melissa Etheridge is
I
a
don't
lesbian,
know. I
and
don't
with
know.
her.
Are these? Is
Oh,
this like a country
okay.
musician or something? I don't
No.
know Melissa
Oh,
Etheridge.
okay.
I'm showing my
Okay. She
age.
was. Yeah, yeah. You are. This was a big story at the time. Anyway, well, it's one of like this was at a day. This was at a time when this was a new thing. Couples having children with sperm donors or things like that, and in this case, yeah. So it was just sort of like it was this new 21st century-esque kind of child rearing arrangement. And then speaking of which, the first of Michael Jackson's first three kids were born, and this is also sort of
Oh,
dubious
right.
parentage. You see what I'm getting
Yeah,
at?
dubious
uh, um,
parentage.
yeah, like I don't really see Michael in any of those kids. Is the way I would put it bluntly. So yeah, I just no judgment. It's just this is it was a really interesting and unusual configuration of planets, and it's interesting that the kind of human beings that are ushered into the world at that time.
That's fascinating. Um, um, I'll have to learn more about those people.
Okay, yeah, okay, yeah. Melissa Etheridge, do you know who David Crosby is?
Yes, yeah,
Surely.
yeah, yeah. I know
Yes.
Dave
Okay.
Crosby. Yeah,
All
that's
right.
why I was
Melissa
confused.
Etheridge was huge, huge sort of singer songwriter
Okay.
in the late '80s, early '90s. Yeah. All right. Oh,
What? Oh,
I,
what?
I,
So you didn't
I.
get to the good part though about Bowie's transits, or at least what I thought you were going towards, because I thought, even his like latest, his very last album, I
Oh yeah,
thought,
yeah.
was pretty
Yeah, yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, originally I was just going to show that Neptune, but by all means, since we've sort of gone through a good part of his professional life, let's not just leave it there. Just a moment here. I'm going to reopen it. All right. Yeah. So this was him leaving us, and his last album, Black Star, just the day before, right?
I don't know how close it was to his death, but
It
yeah, it
was
was very, very
within
close.
days. Within days, yeah.
So what kind of blows my mind about this is that the name of the album is Black Star.
Yeah.
And it's not exactly easy listening. You know? I felt very much like it was kind of sort of cryptic, and seemingly had enigmas to crack if you wanted
Mhm.
to, go into it. It felt like it was almost like his sort of musical lost will and testament or something.
Right.
Almost like Bach's Kunst der Fuge or something, like where he sort of leaves a message there or something. But I also think it's just so wild that he named it Black Star, given where Pluto is
Yeah.
located at the time of the release of this album, and the fact that it was his passing.
Yeah.
And so I kind of wondered to myself, was he doing this deliberately? Was he calling like Pluto the Black Star? Remember, 2016 is also the year that we actually got, or no, it was the previous summer in
That we had the
2015
Venus retrograde in Leo. Yeah.
that we finally saw Pluto like in high def.
Oh,
For the
right. Yeah.
first
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
of the flyby. And so I wonder if in David Bowie's like construction of this album, he was taking that into account, because he had some astrological awareness, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, and think about it. His Space Oddity was absolutely written with the moon landing in
Oh
mind.
yeah.
And it's not his very first album, but it's kind of like the first album of the David Bowie we know. Like there is
He's
the
well, I always think of it as like breakthrough single,
sure, yeah, yeah, yeah,
and it's so interesting that it represents that it's become so associated with the moon landing, where humanity sort of broke the surly bonds of Earth, right?
right,
Because the very next thing he does is comes back from space as an alien, right?
yeah,
Ziggy Stardust. So it's
sure.
like he
And
was kind of,
and
yeah,
his father died like just after, like in this, I think in the summer of 69. I have the chart in the file, but it's like that Mars, remember Mars is retrograde here. It's right on his Venus rather, and possibly his midheaven when he records Space Oddity. And it's sort of rushed release to be, connected to the moon landing, which is part of the reason it gets some sort of media attention. But also his father dies right around that time, which I find interesting.
right.
Um, the,
Also kind of, well, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to point out, if Aquarius is his rising sign, he would have been, he had just turned 69 when he died, which means he had just gone into a Scorpio perfection year 2 days earlier. And look at where Mars is relative to this stuff. I find it interesting because he's got the rare Sun Mars conjunction in Capricorn, which is something that only happens every 32 years. So he had it in 1979 and in 2011 were his recurrence transits. So I think the 1979 one is like Lodger, the Lodger album.
Wow.
But keep in mind, this is a guy who nearly lost sight in one of his eyes because of an accident. For
Yeah.
starters, yeah.
Very, very literal.
Yeah.
I also think of Iman, because he got married to her when Uranus and Neptune were conjunct his
Right.
sun, and then their time together ends, as
With Pluto coming there, yeah.
his son,
No,
the ruler of the seventh house, and he even has Pluto in the seventh as well. So it's kind of there's a lot of ways it works.
It does all make a lot of sense. It does all make a lot of sense. Yeah, maybe sometime we do a full-on live stream rectification of Bowie, but really get our ducks in a row. I don't know.
I mean, I've seen some of these examples before, and I think that I would certainly be drawn, towards seeing Aquarius as the right rising sign, because of the things, are kind of matching up the way I would hope that they would.
Yeah.
And quite impressively. So
yeah,
it's not like it's a Cancer rising or something. It's
and all that stuff, like the Moon, Saturn, Pluto in the seventh house. Even though he was always a solo artist, he's always a collaborator.
Right.
There's nothing, nowhere Is he really just like a guy who like, you know, went into a studio by himself and crafted so like he is the visionary, obviously. He's the senior partner in any partnership. But when his solo career got going, he was really trying to have a duet with his friend John Hutchison, you know. So like even there, like all along, he was always a partnership guy, whether it's Tony Visconti or Mick Ronson or Brian Eno, Robert Fripp, you know,
Freddie
you name
Mercury.
it.
That's like
Freddie
one of his
Mercury.
most
Yeah. Yeah.
famous
Yeah. Sure.
team ups, right? Under
Yeah.
Pressure.
Yeah. Mick Garson, you know,
But then
whoever
by
it
the
is.
time Neptune's in Capricorn, you know, you have Vanilla Ice sampling it, and or he, oh no, Vanilla Ice claimed he wasn't taking.
But
He,
it was totally
yeah,
under
but
pressure.
obviously
I
it
mean,
was.
you
Yeah,
can say it's not, but like, I'm
it
sorry.
absolutely was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, Vanilla Ice. Good Lord. We were talking about Bowie. How did we wind up with Vanilla Ice?
Well, there is a connection. You know,
There
you
is.
could almost, you could probably play, you know, that 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon game with David Bowie, and you know,
Yeah,
be able to
yeah, you
connect with
can.
many
You
different
really
types
can.
of people.
Yep. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely can.
anyway, well, thank you for delivering on your Bowie promise.
That,
And
that's my pleasure. That's my pleasure. There was something else a little more recent that I wanted to bring up. Did you have something that you wanted to talk about first, or?
yeah, I can talk about it. Anyone who has been following me on Twitter, I made a tweet basically talking about how Tom Hiddleston, the actor who portrays Loki in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you know, he's just come to the end of you've just come to the end of the season 2 of the Loki TV show, which sort of takes place parallel to some of the events in the main movies from Marvel. And he said in this interview that he was cast in the movie at 29 originally back in 2011 for Thor, and that he's now 42, and he's sort of talking about this in a way in which he's sort of reflecting on the fact that he's played this role for such a long time, for 14 years. And so I was just pointing out how to many astrologers those numbers should automatically set off alarm bells, because we know that 29 is the age of the Saturn return. Age 42 tends to be pretty close to the Uranus opposition. And 14 years, that interval, is roughly half of a Saturn cycle. So even just from one small statement that he made, and he's obviously not talking about this like with astrological awareness necessarily that we know of, he basically said that I got cast in my Saturn return, and I stayed in this role for for a whole Saturn opposition, and now that I'm at my Uranus return, I'm kind of you know looking at what's next and doing something new and moving on from this old role that he's had for many years. And so I just thought it was such an interesting and sort of straightforward pattern of connections that astrologers can draw from a very simple statement. I think that's probably one of my favorite things, is when like non-astrological people unwittingly, inadvertently, say things that have such a clear astrological significance, but they're not even aware of it themselves. So I looked a little deeper into the transits that the actor Tom Hiddleston was having during his time as Loki, and forgetting the past and where he's at now. And it's actually it's a little different than what he said. He said he got cast at 29. He actually got cast at 28, but you can see very clearly from the transits that his casting, the playing the role of Loki, was clearly linked to his Saturn return. So I can share my screen here to sort of show you a little bit about what that looks like. So we don't have a birth time for Tom Hiddleston. So unfortunately, we're only dealing with his general planetary placements here. but you can see he was born with the sun in Aquarius at 20 degrees. And we can see he was born with Saturn conjunct Jupiter. He was one of that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of 1981. This is actually quite interesting because another MCU actor has a very similar, was born at a kind of similar time, was Chris Evans, the guy who ends up playing Captain America.
Mm.
So what I thought was really fascinating is anyone who knows, that I've been a fan of the MCU and that I've talked about this before. I've talked before about how the MCU movies, seem to be tracking this Jupiter-Neptune cycle. And the reason that's important is because you can see that when, for example, when Disney bought Marvel, that happened at a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in Aquarius. And you can see Jupiter was at 19 degrees of Aquarius. And this purchase, was what would create this interconnected universe of movies that would reach the kind of heights that it has. So when we compare the year, basically, that Hiddleston was cast as Loki in Thor, you can see that sort of happening in the context of that Jupiter-Neptune conjunction that was happening during that year. And that Jupiter
Wow.
transit through Aquarius would have been hitting his natal sun. Now, at the time, Saturn was at 14 degrees of Virgo, but we also know just from, I wasn't able to get like exact dates on this, but I think the whole casting process kind of started early in the year of 2009.
Mm.
So this was sort of happening while Saturn was in these sort of earlier degrees of Virgo, and that should raise alarm bells, because we know Saturn right now is traversing the early degrees of Pisces. So
Yeah.
this is the way in which it's actually a Saturn opposition. It's not a Saturn opposition in terms of his natal Saturn, but it is
No,
a
but
Saturn opposition
from the
from
hiring,
time.
yeah.
Yeah, from the start of the job, basically.
Yeah.
And this is really interesting too when you consider Hiddleston opposite Chris Hemsworth, the guy who ends up playing Thor, because you'll notice that Tom Hiddleston was born with the sun in Aquarius, while Chris Hemsworth was born with the sun in Leo, which is so hilarious because if you've seen the movies, they have this fantastic rapport where, Chris Hemsworth, he's
Frenemy brothers.
yeah, well, they're a perfect opposite,
Yeah.
kind of pairing where Loki is this sort of cold, calculating trickster, villainous, trickster at times, whereas Thor is kind of this more classical hero, and kind of good time himbo.
Right. Well,
And they
but
sort of
he's
play
also,
off each other very
but
well.
he's also sort of like, noble as much as Thor is,
Sure.
naive in the way that good and noble people are, because he doesn't,
Right.
think like Loki.
Sure. So they kind of joined the great. There have been several pairings that people really enjoy, where we have these sort of Suns and Leos versus Suns and Aquarius. I think Gillian Anderson is Sun and Leo,
Yep,
and
yep,
yeah,
and David Duchovny. No, they're
yeah.
both Leos.
Well,
No, they're
no,
both
there's
Leos.
both Leos with
They're
like
both
Moon
Leos.
in Aquarius or something.
Right. Yeah.
But if I've written before about how you can almost boil down a lot of stories to this idea of like the Sun figures versus Saturnian figures, or
Mm.
Sun in Leo versus Sun in Aquarius. So here it's very kind of literal, that Chris Hemsworth, Chris Hemsworth is really the perfect person astrologically to play someone like the God of Thunder. He's born with the Sun in Leo in a trine by sign to Jupiter conjunct Uranus. That's pretty good for
Right.
playing the
But
God of Thunder.
that's not a time chart. I don't,
It's not a time chart.
no.
No. Don't pay attention to the time.
Yeah.
But the important thing you should know though for this is their casting was announced roughly at the same time, and so you can see that Hemsworth's chart was also kind of locked into that Jupiter Neptune conjunction, which would be happening over the course of that year, where Jupiter would be not only conjunct Hiddleston's sun, but would also be opposite Hemsworth's sun in Leo as well.
Right.
So then that kind of takes us to today. Well, not really today, but like when, say, the final episode and what looks to be, I won't give any spoilers, but
Yeah, I
what
haven't
looks to
seen
be
it
the
yet, so don't
final.
you dare.
Yeah, that what could almost be the season finale, not just a not just a it's not rather what could almost be a series finale, not just a season finale. We can see that Saturn is in the early degrees of Pisces, and so we know that Saturn is going to be moving past the exact degrees of where it was when Hiddleston was preparing to take on this role. So this is the way in which the 14 years Saturn opposition really plays out. It's not from his natal Saturn, it's from the time he got the role to when he seems to be potentially exiting out of it. um I mean, it's not like completely a foregone, he could potentially come back. It's we'll never know. But I mean, from an astrological point of view, this definitely looks like a significant,
Oh yeah.
turning point.
Oh, absolutely.
Where he is,
Absolutely.
because remember, he's also age 42, so we know this is close to the Uranus opposition, and that often does end up being kind of a breakthrough or breakdown, or just where someone kind of needs something new. So he hasn't
Yeah.
had the Uranus opposition to the exact degree yet, but
Hey,
we
at 42, he's going to have it. At
yeah,
42, at some
yeah.
point, he's going to have it. Yeah, the Uranus half return, which also sort of winds up being the sort of Saturn return and a half, if you will.
Mhm.
But it's sort of the counter Saturn return, that period at 42. It's the midlife crisis. The Uranus half return is about wanting to sort of reconnect with your true self, the like who you were as a teenager, when you had your idealism, you had your values, you had a personality. Life hadn't sort of cut you at the knees yet. And there's a kind of resurgence and like a renewed adolescence in a way. You want to do what you want to do, depending on how strong Uranus is in the chart.
Well, and that's actually a really interesting counterpoint to bring up, because we know that probably one of the most famous examples of a Uranus opposition is Robert Downey Jr., who was cast at his Uranus opposition. Um, can you see that?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So, obviously before Robert Downey Jr. had been cast as Iron Man, uh, he was really having a lot of struggles in his life with substance abuse, even
oh
serving time in jail and
yeah.
or
And yet
prison.
always performing really well in movies. Like
Yeah.
even when he was not in a good movie, he was great in it. Even like
Yeah.
when
He
his
was
life,
always the best part of a bad movie. Yeah.
yeah, his life was a mess, and we were always marveling. It's like, but he was really good in that movie. How is he like on trial now? It was kind of bewildering.
Yeah.
But it went on for
So,
quite a while. I have in
right.
my file, I have the chart for all his arrests and everything. And it's an interesting thing to follow astrologically. But obviously, that the greatest part of the story is how he really turned all that around
It's
in a
the well,
huge way.
it's the ultimate comeback story,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, come back and then some. Like,
and then some.
I mean,
Yeah,
not just getting clean and getting out of prison, but literally becoming the highest
the
paid
biggest
actor
movie star.
in
Yeah,
your entire the
yeah,
industry. So yeah, I mean, I always think of him when I think of the possibilities of a Uranus return, that sometimes they can be truly amazing and life
yeah.
changing. Also worth noting that he was cast right at the Jupiter Neptune square, which was the square prior to the Jupiter Neptune conjunction where Disney bought Marvel, and that's really where things kind of took off really crazily. And in general, the what's kind of hilarious to me is how the producers of the films deliberately set up the films in phases, and these phases just happen to perfectly correspond with the Jupiter conjunctions, squares, and oppositions. So in 2009, at the Jupiter Neptune conjunction Aquarius, that was the beginning of phase one, which began
Hmm.
really with Iron Man retroactively, but the first Disney produced one was the Avengers. And then phase two began um, after the Avengers was released, which was at the Jupiter Neptune Square. Phase three begins with Civil War, which was in 2016, which was Jupiter opposite Neptune. And then at the Jupiter Neptune closing square, that was 2019, which was the Avengers Endgame massive cinematic event, for anyone who went to it.
Yeah.
The particular screening that I went to, people really went nuts. it was very strange how that rarely had a movie franchise sort of reach this kind of fervor of this
Mm.
just absolute fever pitch of excitement and anticipation. And then what's interesting is I kind of anticipated that with the Jupiter Neptune conjunction in Pisces in 2022, that this would be, at the time, they said, the time I wrote this article, they said there weren't going to be any more phases going forward. But what we've kind of seen is that 2022, that was when the Doctor Strange sequel came out, which kind of explored this idea of the multiverse. And of course, Jupiter conjunct Neptune and Pisces definitely contains some of those ideas of like multiple realities.
There are no boundaries to reality.
Yeah,
Anything can happen.
But that also kind of makes me
you
think
can have
that when
three Spider-Mans talking to each other.
Yeah, but that makes me think that when Saturn meets up with Neptune, that there'll be a hard kind of reset to this, or a ceasing to this particular version of this franchise, and that in general, where audiences are putting their money, may just change. That we talked about this before with like Neptune and Aries. One of the things I sort of suspect is that we'll kind of move past this Disney Marvel era, and we'll look back on this as kind of like the Neptune Pisces era of, this kind of golden age of making dreams come true.
Yeah, because think about it. I mean, like, there is no sign that is more superhero than Aries. And when Saturn goes into Aries, it's like, yeah, we don't really want, superheroes right now. If you get like the public's just kind of going to be. I want to just add, I'm an old Marvel Comics fan from my childhood, and so I do have a Marvel Comics file here. Let me get that out of the way. Marvel Comics file in my database is like 270 charts here. Some of the key figures, and then all these sort of important issues. Not every issue of every comic. It looks like it's mostly Avengers, X-Men, things like. But I made this file like 20 years ago. You can see I stopped in 2004 with the second Spider-Man movie. Like, this is something I made ages ago. And this is true for a lot of things in my database. Like, I would do some work and then I would sort of move on and do something else, and everything needs to be sort of developed further and what have you. But this is a good start here at this many charts. And I just wanted to show you, speaking of Jupiter Neptune, Stan Lee has a Jupiter Neptune square. Yeah.
That, in fact, that's the same Jupiter Neptune square that Disney was founded under.
Right. So, yes, you're right. Yeah.
1922. So they have the so when that Jupiter Neptune conjunction came about in 2009, that was when they kind of merged together.
Right.
Which is interesting too, because that happened at the Neptune opposition of Stan Lee's natal chart and of Disney's. Yep. So you had this kind of great merging of these I guess imagination studios, enterprises, etc.
Yeah, indeed. Fascinating stuff. Absolutely fascinating. We've talked about Greta Gerwig and the Barbie cycle. I did. Yeah, we talked about it here. I talked about it with Chris on the Astrology podcast. We've covered that a fair amount. I wanted to talk about something that happened this week. Speaking of Chris and the Astrology podcast, I was talking to him this morning, and he mentioned to me, I'd seen that the news article, Sam Altman was fired from OpenAI.
Oh yeah.
And I actually joked. I'm like, gee, do you think it's because Patrick has been teaching OpenAI the ephemeris? Like,
yeah, it's my fault. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, it's Patrick. Patrick, have you triggered the robot apocalypse by teaching the ephemeris to OpenAI? Did you get Sam fired?
See, I'm the problem, because it's allowing people who shouldn't be able to do things that they couldn't do. That's we can't have that.
Right.
But I don't really know. I mean, from everything I've read about this development, it seems very unclear about what the
Well,
issue
they're
was.
apparently
Um,
already asking him back, but I just wanted to show you because when Chris told me this, I immediately, we don't have a time for Sam, but we do have a birthday, and I was looking at his chart earlier this year, and it is very striking. This is his chart. We don't have a time, and then these are his transits when he got fired.
boom.
Right. Let me just change the wheel style here, since it's not a time chart. So yeah, Mars is on his Saturn opposite his natal Mars. And obviously like his moon is probably, either late Taurus or early Gemini. Uranus is fairly close here. But also he's got this Sun Pluto opposition, and look at where Pluto is headed, right? Transiting Pluto is going to make a T-square to this natal Sun Pluto opposition. But the main thing is, the minute I saw this Mars on his Saturn, I'm like, well, this doesn't look bad at all. If anything, this looks like a good thing. And it looks like they already want to sort of bring him back or something. But typically, a Mars transit to Saturn, even if the chart is diurnal, is usually a favorable transit for the native. Like, it really has to be pretty severe for it not to be. Certainly, if this transit does wind up being terrible for him, we can probably conclude he's a diurnal chart. But
I
like
mean,
I'm saying, I don't.
I don't think people would say getting fired is a great thing, though.
No, but it can be. It can be if it's sort of if it winds up being sort of some strategic feather in his cap. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Like, no, you're absolutely right. Getting fired is not a good thing, objectively speaking. But maybe since they're already trying to get him back, maybe there's some leverage that he has that we don't understand.
Right. I mean, the way I can understand Mars conjoining Saturn as a positive transit is that if Saturn is your inclination towards caution or fear, or inertial forces, then Mars would seem to be like a drill sergeant,
Yeah,
kind of poking you and prodding you to get up and go, despite your
yeah,
reservations.
yeah.
So I think, Mars conjunct Saturn can be an encouraging transit to act despite when you have reservations or fears. But Mars opposite Mars, I would tend to not see terribly
This is
positively.
that is typically, yes. Mars opposite Mars is more worrisome. But all things being I mean, he's always got this Saturn Mars opposition. All things being considered, somehow I think this works out for him, most likely.
Well, um,
I
yeah, I
guess we'll
mean
see.
it's
Yeah.
possible. It's possible that Jupiter will station direct at 5 degrees Taurus, which is pretty close to his sun. It's hard to know exactly what way this would hit him because it's an untimed chart, but
Yeah.
um we also know this probably ties into like the recent eclipses because the
Hmm.
last lunar eclipse would have happened at 5 degrees Taurus, and that's also really close to his natal sun. And we can see he was born just
Two,
after.
no, just before. He's born
Just
2 weeks before
pardon me.
a total lunar eclipse. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
can.
I guess it would have been too far for him to be born.
Yeah, I have the eclipses here.
Yes, that makes sense.
You can see the ones that.
And because we talked about this in an earlier live stream where we kind of compared the natal charts of Sam Altman and
Yeah.
um, Mark Zuckerberg. That's right. They have
Right.
very
Yeah. Yeah.
similar charts in some ways.
In a way, yeah. Mark is a year older with the Mars retrograde.
Hmm.
Oh, that's Marvel Comics. Never mind. I was going to pull up the other thing, but yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, that's
I just since yeah, I mostly wanted to needle you about your amazing progress with OpenAI, and how
oh
you're bringing down an empire.
oh yeah. No, I doubt it. But I think I kind of get the impression from everything that I've seen Sam Altman say is I kind of get the impression that he is more of an advocate for being more safe with it. And so I wonder if there's potential divisions behind the
Right.
scenes over like whether to go forward with things or whether to hold back. Um, and I mean, yeah, it's impossible to know what's really going on. I think from our perspective at least, it's it's just very remarkable that this kind of Sun Mars transit would light up his charts so much, and that you'd have this kind of extreme event happen that we don't quite know what the exact outcome of it will be. But every ending is a beginning. So this is any kind of Sun Mars or any kind of conjunction with the Sun is going to represent some sort of end of one chapter and the beginning of another one. Pardon me. So this is Sam Altman's post-firing era, whether he returns to OpenAI or not.
Yeah. Anyway,
I mean, even Steve Jobs was fired from Apple,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, but that took 12 years to come back. I don't think Sam's going to be away for 12. It looks like they're already trying to get him back. So who knows what the hell is going on?
Yeah. It'll be, knowing that his Sun Pluto opposition is squared by Pluto entering Aquarius. We already, we know that there's a couple more ingresses, and so I would assume he is still very much a part of that ingress story.
Well, what happens next summer? Next July 22nd, we get the first Sun in Leo opposite Pluto in Aquarius transit. Because last summer it was Sun at 29 Cancer opposite Pluto at 29 Capricorn. So this coming summer, we get the first Sun Pluto opposition in the fixed signs, and that'll be like a T-square to his natal Sun Pluto. So that should be interesting.
Yeah. I'm also a little nervous about the end of next year because we had those crazy Canadian forest fires when Mars was
Canadians.
When Mars was in Leo opposite Pluto and Aquarius. That was like this extreme fire event. Yeah. And you know what happens at the end of next year, don't you?
Oh, yes. Mars goes retrograde opposite Pluto. Yeah,
exactly. So we get a retrograde Mars opposite Pluto.
Although in December, I promise you, Quebec is not going to catch fire in December. Well, I mean, it could, but not forest fire,
Right.
Like, no.
Right.
I mean, the world will be well and truly screwed if Quebec's having forest fires in December, January. I can assure you as a native, that's super, super unlikely.
Right. Yeah, no, that would obviously, just thinking about the season, but I still wonder how, those, given that it was a Mars Pluto interaction.
No, you're right. Yeah, there's something else. Yeah,
some other kind of contamination of the air potentially with Mars in retrograde in Leo. Also worth noting that is happening in our first house. Since we're both Leo risings, but
but I mean, being a Leo rising means you always have Mars go retrograde in your first house every 15 to 17 years. It's you're the most used to it, whether you like it or not. It's not like those poor Aquarian risings who, they go through their whole lives and then 2018 comes around. What the hell was that?
Right. So the last time Mars went retrograde in Leo would be December of 2009 into early 2010.
Right.
And the most notable thing that I remember seeing in that time is like right around the retrograde station, Mars went retrograde. I believe it was on the degree of Obama's Sun. And he said that that was when he made the decision to escalate the war in Afghanistan. Which we talked before about how Mars retrogrades tend to be bad times for Goliath to go after David. And and so that's sort of what's ended up being the case, that the war thankfully is over. But well, there are other problems now too, but at least, the American presence is out of that.
You're reminding me it was 14 years ago, 2 days ago, that I had a fire in my apartment as that Mars was getting ready to go retrograde in Leo, and my apartment building. And the neighbor below me was a hoarder and fell asleep with a cigarette and lit all these newspapers on fire. The guy whose apartment was next to mine, his apartment was totally trashed. My apartment miraculously was basically okay. The firemen moved my TV so they could bash a hole in the wall to get into my neighbor's apartment. But it was crazy standing outside in an alleyway and watching, flames engulf the building I was living in. So that was a pretty intense Mars retrograde transit.
Wow. I'm trying to remember
Yeah.
what happened to me. I'll have to do some more research to remember what I was doing personally at that point.
Well, you were probably still in school,
I
right?
was I was in my senior
Yeah.
year.
Because I had seen you earlier that year in March of 2009 was our famous
Right. Yeah,
rendezvous at the
that's
Hammersmith
true.
Hammerstein. Yeah.
So I was still in school at that point. Yeah, I'll have to do some thinking on that.
Okay.
But
Yeah, it comes around.
It's funny though, because I'm kind of realizing this is sometimes what my clients experience, where I'll ask them about a particular transit, and they just kind of have like no idea, and then
Yeah.
sometimes I'll get an email later going like, "Oh my god, I
Yeah.
totally forgot."
Yeah.
We're kind
Absolutely.
of
Yeah.
bad historians of our own lives.
Speak for yourself, sir.
Maybe you're a better historian than I am. I
Right.
feel like
But no,
I think there's a lot that we kind of put in we also have to prioritize what is important. So there are some details we forget. I mean, sometimes I'll see things on Facebook pop up in the memories that I've just completely forgotten about. And I just imagine that experience gets more extreme as you age. But
oh yeah, no, but I hear you. I have clients sometimes can't remember things from their past, and then later on I hear from them like, "Oh, I totally remembered that thing you were trying to talk to me about." That's why it's great that it in our day and age, clients get a recording that they can review and sort of really take in everything that we cover in an hour, because it's a lot of information, and it's a lot to expect someone to just sort of remember everything that's said in that time. So
right.
yeah, it helps a lot.
Another major Mars signature I think it's quite interesting that there's been so many earthquakes. Now I
Yeah.
realize that obviously like earthquakes are like a geophysical thing. On the other hand, the late Robert Blaschke, the reason I was thinking about him is because I know I think Revelor Press is going to be re-releasing some of his books, and actually Rob Blaschke was kind enough to send while he was still alive. He sent me a copy of one of his books, and left a message in there saying like, "To my favorite, astrologer of the new generation," which I thought was always kind of funny.
Yeah, he was a good guy. I miss him.
Yeah, and he kind of took like recurrence transits and sort of took them a step further by kind of looking into the exact chart of that moment for a given location. I don't know how much I really buy that, but it is an approach you can follow, and he seemed to have some success with that. But I remember he said a long time ago, and he wrote this, maybe I just remember this from like all MySpace days, but he said something about how the timing of earthquakes. He said a common pattern to like earthquakes was when the sun and Mars were in square opposition or conjunct configurations, and similarly with Venus. He said when Venus was conjunct the sun while square Mars, he said that seemed to kind of amplify the possibility of earthquakes. So in this case, we just have a Sun Mars conjunction that happens to be a very, very close one. So, I mean, I would probably want to statistically sort of verify that.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Um,
I think I pulled out some earthquake charts the other week, didn't I?
yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard to find like just a signature. I think that
Yeah.
signifies them. Although I did get an email reminding me that, or pointing out to me that I had entered the wrong date for I was off by one day. It wasn't terribly critical, but I appreciate it when keen-eyed viewers see errors in data, because I'm trying to keep a clean house. Yeah, the earthquakes definitely, there does seem to be a lot of activity all at once, right? I mean, newsworthy activity. It's certainly it's something that I think about more when I'm in Vancouver, because we're right here in a zone.
On the ring of fire.
Yeah, like, I mean, basically, we were due to have a big earthquake in 1950, so we're 70 plus years overdue, and yeah, it could be bad.
There was a I wish I could remember his name right now. He has some research papers where he shows that um, he was able to link like Lucas numbers to the intervals between major earthquakes. Lucas numbers are kind of based on Fibonacci
Okay.
sequences, and so he seemed to have uncovered some pattern of sort of a Fibonacci based relationship, like intervals or durations between earthquakes. I would want to read that again. I wish I could remember his name so I could, if people want to read it, they can. His last name begins with an M. I don't think I'm going to be able to remember it. If I do, I guess.
I'm seeing something here. Modified Fibonacci dual Lucas method for earthquake prediction. Yeah, yeah.
Is it?
Modified. There's 4 names on it. They're all Greek names: Bukovalis, Gukasios, Thessalikas, and Drakotos. But it says modified Fibonacci dual Lucas method for earthquake prediction.
Well, that's interesting. There was a different. It was a different person I was thinking of. The last name
Published in
M.
June of 2015. Yeah.
But I guess this is something people have sort of noticed. They've been able to figure out that there's some kind of mathematical relationship between earthquake occurrences and volcanic eruptions and major turns in like the stock market. It seems like it's probably I think that the underlying nature of reality is somehow mathematical. So it's not entirely surprising that there would, eventually be these kinds of relationships, which would be hard to notice upon first glance. And honestly, I think that probably is undergirding some of the things that we notice with astrology, especially with planetary cycles that have like a really close mathematical resonance, like the Sun Venus relationship, the Venus Earth relationship.
Mhm. Yeah.
That is there's something about that interval and its relation to these kind of natural ratios that seems to be kind of key to like the whole thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, someone much smarter than me will figure it out. I can't even remember
Well,
the name
no,
of the guy
it's gonna be
whose paper I read.
it's gonna be your OpenAI, partner, astrology partner who you've trained that's gonna help you
There we go.
lead us in these
Well,
important
it will
directions.
be if someone can figure that out. I mean, obviously, this would be really amazing because then we could evacuate places that we knew would be due for an earthquake, which
Mhm.
completely changed the way that we would organize society if we were
Yeah.
able to predict these things as accurately as possible. um I sometimes wondered about that, like what would happen to the world if you really could create like a prediction machine, and that we kind of had this sort of
Right,
mass
right.
acceptance that like things are predictable, and that we kind of have to act accordingly if we want to act in accordance with it. um
I like the sound of it.
I don't know, I mean, it's
I know some people are gonna think it's dystopian, but, like, as far as I'm considered, like, we live in dystopia.
right.
Like
uh, I mean, I think being able to predict when natural disasters occur, I mean, that's a pretty good thing to be
yeah,
able to predict.
yeah.
um but anyway, so yeah, if you
Yeah,
want to do
science
some
fiction.
research, yeah, Lucas numbers. Apparently, there's a way
Lucas
you
numbers,
can
yeah.
approach this sort of mathematically, or with this idea of a temporal structure underlying seemingly random events.
Yeah, it's definitely outside my purview.
Right.
I'm a people person. But it's important work. Like, I mean, there's so many facets to astrology that we do need people who are sort of devoted to these individual things. Like we were talking about, like with sports, neither you and I are sports fans, but boy,
Right.
sports astrology could be so you know,
Yeah, someone could really do that.
fascinating. Like if you were really into that world, it would be really, really good to have.
It's I've been finding that more and more that for someone to be a really good astrologer or a particular type of thing, you have to almost be like a dual expert. You have
Yeah.
to kind of know
Yeah.
what you're doing with astrology, but also with the phenomenon you're
Something
studying.
else, some other field of life that you need to know
Which
a
is
lot
really,
about.
really cool because I think some people don't really know what to do with the knowledge they've accumulated before they get into astrology. But
That's true.
I
Yeah.
think that it's very applicable,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
whatever you previously were interested in. You can,
Yeah, to any other passion or what have you.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. That is the beauty to it. Yeah, well, the comment section's nice and calm these days or today. Apart from more jokes about
People's balls
people's balls and yeah.
and them being
Uh,
gigantic.
and
um,
thanks for that, folks.
so okay, all right.
Oh, all right. So yeah, okay. Um,
So I was thinking, since we're kind of coming up to the end of this year, I'm not saying we have to do this in this live stream today, but maybe we should have like a kind of New Year's forecast type episode, or a sort of look
okay.
ahead
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
2024, or
Yeah.
a recap of 2023, and then a look ahead episode at 2024.
Yeah. Maybe our last two streams of 2023.
Yeah,
We do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Um,
It is a good idea.
and are we still going to be here next week? Because I know, like, a lot of people in the US, for example, are going to be, recovering from Thanksgiving. I mean, I'll still do
Yeah.
it. I'll still do it if people want us to.
I'm here. I mean, look, not everyone watches it live too. Some people watch it later in the week and
That's
stuff.
true.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
I don't see any reason. I'm in the land. We had our Thanksgiving when you guys were doing your silly Columbus Day thing. So,
Indigenous Peoples Day in this household. Um,
good. Yes.
and in certain states, they've started sort of trying to make that official.
Yeah. As well, they should.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So
People are into the recap and the look ahead. The look ahead. That's good. Yeah. We can definitely do.
So I'm somewhat looking ahead just a little bit to Mars's ingress into Sagittarius.
Mhm.
It's kind of strange because Mars goes from being in this extremely empowered position by sign, at least in Scorpio, to immediately running into this square with
Right.
Saturn. Do we have any ideas about what kind of things we might expect to see with that kind of configuration in the sky? What does Mars and Sagittarius square Saturn and Pisces make you think of? Because I immediately think of this kind of martial impetus running into a kind of obstacle. It's like right now Mars is unimpeded, but there'll be like somehow a slowdown or a roadblock that sort of suddenly appears at that
Right.
place.
Yeah. I'm thinking, as much as like the Sun, Mars, and Scorpio, well, I mean, I guess there was some celebrity stuff, but I'm inclined to think like Mars and Sagittarius is like when the world is really focused on some kind of like drama that involves some glamour. I don't know, maybe Taylor Swift and her guy or who knows what,
It's funny. About a year ago in the summer, I tweeted about how the Venus-Jupiter square at the end of 2023's summer would somehow be about people being excited about a celebrity wedding of sorts. Now, there wasn't a big celebrity wedding in that time, but that was when people started going nuts about the whole Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce thing. And I've heard a lot about this lately because my daughter is a really big Swift fan. And so,
Oh, I thought you were gonna say she was a big football fan and she's
oh,
fascinated with how her favorite player is dating this pop singer or whatever.
nah, yeah, she likes the pop singer, but
Okay.
uh, so it's that's just been kind of an interesting thing to see, because at the time that it was happening, it kind of brought attention back to the fact that I'd sort of made this projection. And a lot of people were saying, like, it's too early to say, this seems this seems premature, but it seems to be, accelerating. It seems to be, uh, it's very public. I mean, for it to be fake, it seems like they've gone to a lot of trouble. um, GF Martello says, would you guys be comfortable
Yeah.
retitling the live streams after they're done so that we know what to look for if we missed a stream? On my stream,
It's gonna be done on my stream too. I'll
yeah,
be
on my
fixing
stream,
it.
we have now done that.
Yeah.
Beth has retitled them, given them timestamps, so there is a lot more information now about what we've
Yeah.
talked about. It's not an easy job because we are kind of schizophrenic in our approach.
Yeah. And I'll be updating mine as well, now that we have it done, thanks to Beth. So yeah, look out for that.
Yeah. Well, when I think of Mars in Sagittarius, especially with Saturn, my mind immediately goes back to the late summer of 2016 when Mars was
Right.
retrograde
Retrograde in Sag,
alongside
yeah.
Saturn in Sag, retrograde. And uh, unfortunately, my mind goes back there quite a lot, so more than I'd like. But gosh, what to even
Right.
pick
I
out
mean,
at that time to
yeah,
pick.
Brexit or what have you.
Well, I also kind of see it as, when, uh, well, this is when the situation was deteriorating such that it would make the Trump victory in November possible. And I also think of Mars going retrograde in Sagittarius in the summer of 2001, where
Yeah,
9/11,
exactly.
the
Yeah.
steps are sort of being taken to kind of make that possible. And that was Mars in retrograde in Sagittarius opposite Saturn in Gemini.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
you know, so I kind of think of it as a time when there is, I guess from those events, I sort of associate Mars and Sagittarius as being like, I'm always a little more wary of Mars and Sagittarius, especially because I have Saturn Sagittarius myself, as being times when the way is being paved for things to go wrong. I mean, that's probably overly pessimistic.
I think it's way over pessimistic.
I mean, there's already so many things that have gone wrong, so it's like, what else could it be? No, I'm trouble thinking what else in a sort of mundane context it means.
I'll tell you, when I think of Sun, Mars, and Sagittarius, like we had one pretty close in 1976, and that makes me think of Saturday Night Fever and disco, and just like everyone's like focused on pleasures and whatever drama erupts, it happens around these sort of pleasure centers, fights in nightclubs or yeah, I think of it as being sort of like glamour and I mean, of course, in 76, the difference was it was Sun, Mars, and Neptune. So it's a little sort of like extra glamour in 76. But yeah, with the square to Saturn, I just imagine sort of like uh, um, glamorous drama or
What
drama in the
about
glamour zone.
November 1995? That was a previous Mars and Sagittarius period square Saturn in Pisces. It was
Mm,
later on in the sign, but
yeah, that was when Quebec had the second referendum. That was pretty intense, right around the time of the Pluto transit, the Pluto
right,
ingress to
Pluto ingressing
Sagittarius.
into Sag. Mars is also with Jupiter at that time.
Yeah.
Um, I'll have to think more about what that could mean. I know in general, I've one of the things I've been kind of afraid of for Saturn in Pisces has been the possibility of like greater problems involving water, and water infrastructure, especially when Mars is like opposite it or conjunct it or square it. So one of the things I suppose that could come up would be um, damages to watery infrastructure, with Mars
Right.
in Sag square Saturn and Pisces.
I'm looking here in November of '95. Speaking of glamorous drama, this is when Princess Diana gives an interview for BBC Panorama and admits to adultery.
Oh,
Okay.
that's interesting, actually, because wasn't November 1995 also when Monica and Bill?
When the affair begins, yeah, November
Yeah.
15th, 1995, the same week. You're right. I was just looking at that as you were saying it.
I usually think of that in terms of the Venus-Mars conjunction, but
Yeah,
with
but it is square Saturn. It is square Saturn. It's Venus, Mars, Jupiter conjunct in Sagittarius, square Saturn in Pisces. But yeah, glamour drama.
and what's sort of high passions or pleasures with consequences, I suppose, with the
Right.
interaction of the benefics and malefics in that
And
time.
and something else that happened not too long after. Oh, by this point, Mars was in Capricorn. Was Michael Jackson and Lisa Marie Presley separating because they were married very, very briefly. But that, let's see. Yeah, that was already Mars was in Capricorn by that point. All right.
Let's see, and the other one that would have happened before that would have been in the mid 60s. Let's see what month that would have been. So Mars was in Sag square. Would have been 65. Mars was square.
Must have been
Saturn.
later in the year, maybe in the summer
October.
of 60.
So yeah, in October of 1965, Mars was in Sagittarius with Venus again, square Saturn. So I wonder what in 1965 would
Well, that was when Rhodesia declared unilateral independence, and that's beginning the whole Zimbabwe civil war that wouldn't end until the Mars retrograde of 1980. So there was that.
The Catholic worker movement stages an anti-war protest in Manhattan, which is kind of interesting given the it's Mars running into a square with Saturn. It's almost like, I mean, maybe this could be a good thing for all of the horrendous, violence happening in the world, because, if Mars is running into a square, then it's like maybe something would potentially cause some brief respite, from Mars kind of doing damage. It would be Saturn sort of providing a barrier to it, or chilling things out somehow.
Speaking of glamorous drama, this period, October 26, 1965, is when the Beatles were awarded their members of the British Empire. They went to Buckingham Palace and they're awarded medals by the Queen, and it causes such an outrage. Previous winners of the medal returned their medals. It became this big brouhaha. How dare you give those, vulgar nincompoops an important British, distinction. So yeah, there's stuff like that. There's more of that. Maybe we're going to see drama in the British Empire. Maybe it's going to be royal family stuff, because it sure seems to, that seems to pop up. And talk about glamorous drama.
Right. Yeah, I'd have to do some more research to find some specific recurrences relating to this square. And people are still talking about balls in the comments.
Well, that's just what. No, but not only. Apparently, Rosalind Carter just died. Apparently.
Oh,
Jimmy Carter's wife,
yeah.
former First Lady. Yeah,
that's. To be honest, I thought that had already happened. I think Jimmy Carter's still alive, right? He's still hanging on.
Yes, yeah. Yeah,
Um,
he's 99 now.
yeah, he's crazy old.
Yeah.
um,
Yep.
yeah, he's had some longevity. Uh,
Yep.
only a shame that he couldn't have been president longer, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, he's definitely the best human being who's ever held that job. Let's put it.
yeah, I
He
mean,
wasn't the best president, but he was the best man to have ever been a president, by far.
right. I
And the
mean,
rest of them are
pretty
basically,
pretty decent guy. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, a real person. Yeah,
Do you want to
and
take a look
really
at? Do you want
the
to
only
take a
one.
look at his chart? See what's going on.
Yeah, let's
Now,
do that.
it's not. We're not near a Venus retrograde or anything, so I wouldn't expect him to be, on his way out, right? According, because you've studied presidential deaths before and noticed.
Well, sometimes they die when Venus isn't retrograde, but the last one, when H.W. Bush died, it was during the Scorpio retrograde. Rosalind Carter herself was born with Venus retrograde.
Oh, by the way, I just
Well, just before Venus went retrograde. She's a red 5.
speaking of which, I just remembered the name of the man I was talking about. His name is David McMinn,
Oh, okay.
McMinn. He's the one who came up with he's the one who's been investigating like Lucas numbers and Fibonacci numbers in relation to earthquake prediction. He has another article about the US presidential death cycle and what he calls the non-random hypothesis, saying that there's also a mathematical relationship between
Okay.
presidential deaths, which I thought was really interesting because that is like tying in exactly with what you've
Yeah.
done.
I have I found it with some deaths, but not with every single presidential
Right.
death, although I track them. There are some patterns at work. Definitely. So here I've got Jimmy's, excuse me, Jimmy Carter's chart here. So yeah, this is Jimmy, and yeah, he's got the cazimi was squaring all this stuff here.
Right. So just this past spring, he would have had a solar eclipse occur in his 7th house. That was April 20th. How old is? You said he's 99, so
Yeah, yep.
that means
Yeah, I've never counted perfections that high.
84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99. So he's in a 4th house year.
No. Is that right? Yeah, okay, maybe you're right.
Yeah, 96 would have been a 1st house perfection year because it's divisible by 12.
72, 84, 96. Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
96,
Yeah.
97, 98, 99. So he's in a 4th house year.
Capricorn. Yeah.
So then Saturn ends up transiting through his 6th, and
the exaltation ruler was just in a cazimi in the 2nd.
okay. When did he get married? When did they get married?
Oh, I might have this.
Do we have her
here.
chart?
Yeah, here's her chart. Yeah, I have their wedding is July 7th, 46, the same day George W. Bush, or within a day or so of George W. Bush being born.
That's weird.
Yeah. This is her. Hold on. Let me just put her ankles up. Yeah, she was actually on Carter's staff. You've had other first ladies like, say, Eleanor Roosevelt, be involved in policy, but she was literally on Carter's cabinet, like in the cabinet, which even people like Eleanor Roosevelt hadn't done. So this is her here, and like I was saying, she was born just before 2 days before Venus went retrograde. She's a red 5.
How reliable is the time? Oh, data from mom. Okay.
Dell horoscope quotes data from her mom, born at her grandmom's house.
So
in that great Lois Rodden language, mom, she was at her mom's house.
So she was in a 1st house perfection then. She was 96.
Right.
And so that's highlighting Her Mercury in the 12th, Mars and Venus in the 1st. And you're looking at the
I'm
transit.
looking at the wedding of the wedding chart, but here, if you want to look at her last solar return. This was her birthday. First house perfection year, and the Lord of the Year about to go retrograde in the first house.
And that also rules the 8th.
Yeah.
Huh.
No, this rules the ascendant, and this Mercury was about to go retrograde.
Oh, I meant that the first house perfection year is highlighting Mars as well, though, because
Mars as well. Yes.
So then you end up having the ruler of the 8th in the first. Now that would happen for any given first house perfection she has, but we'd also have to take into account that
Mars won't always be in her first house when she's having a first house perfection year.
That's true.
Like she was born with Mars on the ascendant, but this isn't always going to happen. And then this Mercury, look, it's 6 days before it went retrograde, and that's especially, it's the Lord of the Year, the ruler of the chart, and it's about to go retrograde there.
Yeah, I mean, I would again the fact that the solar eclipse from this past March that happens in her 8th house. I can't say for every Virgo rising that automatically means death, but it is interesting that it happened in that particular solar eclipse happened in her husband's 7th and in her 8th. That's why I was curious how it maybe made sense with the wedding chart and what.
Yeah, well, we can look at her with the wedding chart again.
Oh, well, can we look at all three? Because I just wonder, like,
him, her, and the wedding chart, or
we can look at
or her, the wedding chart, and her solar return.
Oh no, I'm not the solar return as much. I'm just kind of trying to get a handle on
the three of them when they got married.
Yeah, sure. Let's look at that.
Yeah. Well, you notice Venus was on his ascendant when she died. Like it's on his ascendant right now.
Oh, that's right. All right. Yeah. Oh gosh.
And yeah, like the sun was on his midheaven when they got married. He was having a Venus return, not a phase return, but as a zodiacal return. Yeah, and Neptune was just about conjunct his sun.
He is ancient. So he was only 21 at this time.
When he got married, he's 21. Yeah.
So he was in a 10th house year.
And the sun is right there on his midheaven, his Pluto midheaven.
Yeah, that's okay. So then Venus ends up Venus on her sun, Venus on his Venus. Wow. Well, that's good. That's terrible. But they had a crazy long life together.
Yeah, look, when someone that old dies, it's sad, but it's not a tragedy,
right? I mean, it's not unexpected.
What degree is her ascendant? 5 degrees Virgo. Rosalind's ascendant is 5 degrees Virgo. Why is it too blurry? Do I look blurry to people? Because I'm looking at a clear image of myself, and that's what I wonder is why, like on some of these replay videos, I look all blurry, and I cannot for the life of me figure out why that happens.
I don't know. You look.
Yeah, I look good now, but
focus right now.
But look at like my my second to last appearance on the Astrology podcast, and then the clip Beth made, and then other things I've seen. I look out of focus, and I cannot figure it out. So anyway, if anyone has any thoughts about that, do let me know. I have no desire to be fuzzy to all you people. It's the lighting off my screen.
I don't think so, because you look fine.
I look fine now. Like, so I just don't understand, why do I not have this picture in the replay video?
Yeah, that's odd.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, it is what it is. What else can we cover today?
Well, I'm curious about the fact that Jupiter is going to be stationing direct on the degree of the lunar eclipse that just happened. What is your thought on when planets cross the degree of a recent eclipse? Do you see that as an important moment for that?
I mean, ostensibly it should be. Maybe I haven't noticed it as much as I should. Yeah, it'd be interesting to sort of look at examples of that one way or the other.
Well,
What?
sometimes you see that happen even with planetary conjunctions as well. Like uh
Yeah,
Mars was
sure.
crossing the degree of where the Saturn Pluto conjunction had occurred at the
Yeah.
outbreak of the war in Ukraine. There's I'm trying to think of some other just ones off the top of my head. But yeah, it's something that seems to kind of pop up now and again. Actually, even at the 9/11 attacks, that was like Venus coming onto the degree of where the solar eclipse happened from like 1999. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but
That's true, but actually come to think of it, but you're reminding me that the other thing was that there had been an eclipse at 0 Cancer. This in the summer of 2001, like right on the solstice, on the June solstice, there was an eclipse at 0 Cancer, and this was when I was at Project Hindsight on that night, and Alan White was giving a talk, and he talked about how when Saturn reached that eclipse degree in 2003, that the U.S. would be, in some kind of military situation, or a whole lot of, I forget exactly how he worded it, and that did indeed wind up being the case. That was, sort of the when the Iraq War got really sort of ugly after Mission Accomplished and all that. But if he had just thought about the Mars opposition, because remember, Mars was retrograde in Sagittarius, and it made its ingress into Capricorn like a day before 9/11.
right.
And so that in many ways is like a transit to an eclipse point. That's a good point right in there. Just a quite a recent eclipse. Here, I can show you if you like.
Sure. This actually goes back to what we were talking a little bit about with Mars and Sagittarius. It's a mutable sign. And all the mutable signs almost serve the same function as cadent houses do to angular houses. If we can think of mutable signs as being somehow similar to cadent houses, and cardinal signs as being similar to angular houses, and fixed signs as being similar to succeedent houses, then every time a planet goes through a mutable sign, there would be a way in which it's sort of untangling the issues it's dealing with in the previous sign, and kind of leading up to or preparing the way for what will happen
Hmm.
at the next kind of turning point of the season or of the zodiac. And so that is kind of interesting that it wasn't just the Mars retrograde in the summer of 2001 in Sagittarius, that it wasn't just the fact that it was retrograde that kind of led to the uh, uh, the
The attack.
heist,
Yeah.
kind of being
Yeah.
pulled off in the sense that the attack, but also the fact that it was happening in a mutable sign and served as the kind of lead up to the main event, which would be Mars, ingressing into a cardinal place and even its
Right.
exaltation. So it was like right when Mars was at 0 Capricorn that the
Yeah.
attacks happened.
Yeah. So this is the eclipse, June 21st, 2001. And then if we just go right ahead to September 11th, yeah, Mars had just ingressed, next to the node there, just the previous day,
That's true.
or 2 days earlier, or whatever it was. Yeah, so there are things like that.
Wow. Yeah. So I I mean, yeah, I guess it's going to be more noticeable when it's malefics. I'll have to try to find previous examples of like of Jupiter reaching an eclipse, a recent eclipse
Yeah,
degree.
yeah.
Um,
No, it's definitely it's something that we should sort of really track more than we do, or more than I do, certainly. Um,
so it's yeah, I mean, it would potentially point to some deliverance on the promise of that eclipse. I maybe unwisely, I talked about how I thought the eclipse might be good for a ceasefire in Palestine because the uh, the last example I could find of that exact type of eclipse in Taurus, close to that degree range, just happened to be at the conclusion of the so-called French and Indian War, when those documents were first signed. Now, the war didn't actually end until several months later, but it was when the diplomats had actually figured things out. It was like 2 days after this lunar eclipse in Taurus with Jupiter. So what's interesting is while my prediction didn't really turn out, like within like a day or so of that lunar eclipse, the UN did pass a resolution for a ceasefire, but didn't, basically, a few key players, including the United States, vetoed it, and it otherwise was a non-binding resolution, that was
Right.
it wasn't actually going to do anything, but it did demonstrate that the vast majority of the world was, on more or less on the same page as far as ceasing civilian casualties. And so I wonder then if Jupiter's stationing on the lunar eclipse degree, 5 degrees Taurus at the end of December, if maybe that would be an important turning point for things being able to reach some point of resolution or ceasefire at the very least. I can't say my track record's been very good for predicting the ends of wars so far.
Yeah, I wouldn't even hazard to guess that. I still think it's going to be royal family drama or Taylor Swift drama or something like that. I only wish it was something more substantial like that.
Well, I mean, I was able to predict the end of the Afghanistan war. I was able to do that. Well, and the main way that I did that was just by looking at the fact that Saturn and Pluto, had this connection to the war in Afghanistan. So I said back in like 2017, I said in a video that I thought the Saturn-Pluto conjunction would mark the end of the war in Afghanistan, and it turned out that January 2020 was when the United States did sign the treaty with the Taliban to withdraw. So it wasn't when they withdrew, but it was when it was like decided that it was going to end.
Right. When he had the Taliban over to the White House or whatever it was.
I don't know exactly how it happened, but I was
just I was just listening to. I just finished The Divider by. I read Maggie Haberman's book earlier, and now I've read this. It's a big book about the Trump administration, and he invited the Taliban to like the Rose Garden or whatever, and his staff was totally mortified. Anyway.
A long way away from we don't negotiate with terrorists.
So, yeah. Why don't you come over to the Rose Garden? I did a lot of laughing listening to this book. I think my favorite. Okay, this is just off topic for a second, but I have to share this with you. Every Canadian knows this. In 1977, Justin's mom left Justin's dad and ran off with the Rolling Stones, who were on tour. Keith Richards had just been busted for heroin at Toronto Airport. This was Venus retrograde in Aries, which is always a big one for the Stones.
Yeah.
So Margaret Trudeau, Justin's mom, sort of ran off with the Rolling Stones, and she very likely had an affair with Ron Wood, one member of the Rolling Stones, one of 5 guys in the Rolling Stones.
1 out of 5 stones.
Yeah, 1 out of 5, just because he had just gotten divorced, or he was just getting divorced and she's getting divorced, and the two of them, it's not a big secret. Like, they sort of bonded over the fact that they were both leaving marriages, and they had some kind of fling, and whatever, use your imagination, whatever happened. Trump in this book, I love this. Every Canadian knows this. It's not like, some big secret.
Okay.
But Trump in his book, at some point, he's really mad at Justin, and he's like, do you know his mom slept with all the Rolling Stones? And it's just like
every one of them. He's
not even his mom slept with all the Rolling Stones. And
I love that Trump knows about that, and that's what he would do.
no, but it's even like there's already a story, like the scandals out there, like everyone knows she slept with one Rolling Stone. Like Trump's just gonna, he's gotta like give it a Trump spin. Like she slept with all the Rolling Stones.
Wow.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, that's hilarious.
It was one of those moments. I was listening to that on an audiobook and I was in a fairly public place, I had my headphones, and I just burst out laughing in front of a bunch of strangers and they don't know what the hell's going
on. Andrew Gott says, have you checked out Sam Altman's chart from OpenAI? Yeah,
you're
covered that.
You're late to the party, Andrew. We did that. You'll have to catch it on the replay. But thank you for that. That's a good suggestion. If we hadn't caught that, if we hadn't covered it, it would have been a good thing to talk about.
Caroline Marshall says Jupiter can also indicate an expansion on the war. Well, I guess it's true that sometimes Jupiter, can expand whatever it touches. It's not always, it just adds. It doesn't it's kind of, it does it sort of indiscriminately almost. So it can be sometimes sort of hard to tell whether what Jupiter is expanding is good or if it's bad. I mean, because even when Jupiter was in Pisces, people would typically think like, oh, well, that's got to be like expansion of the good. But, the main...
Not if it's getting a square from a retrograde Mars.
when you hear, when I just remember in that time when Jupiter was like conjunct Neptune and it was in Pisces, it was... I was sort of expecting sort of better news in some ways, but the word you kept hearing over and over again in the news was inflation, prices getting higher and higher and higher. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is Jupiter and Pisces. This is, things getting more valuable, price getting bigger and bigger, which is not what you want.
No, I mean, it's working out for someone. Someone's making more money, but it's a good transit for somebody, but not if you're buying groceries. I think when Jupiter gets closer to Uranus, we'll have more of a sense of its role with regard to warfare and ongoing situations. But speaking of which, another interesting development this past week during the cazimi was Biden and Xi Jinping getting together, and Xi being like, suddenly all chill. He's been kind of dodgy all year, and suddenly he's like, oh yeah, it's all good. There's plenty of room in the world.
We want peace. We don't want to do anything.
Taiwan's going to be ours eventually, but don't worry, we're not going to invade them. It's we're just going to let it happen. We're patient. We play the long game, so don't you worry about anything. Keep trading with us. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. The cazimi opposite Uranus. Either it's maybe it's sincere, or maybe he's full of it.
I mean, given the transit, I would tend to be a little more suspicious of it. It's not like this is like a Venus Jupiter conjunction and they're saying this. It's happening at a Mars Uranus. Like,
look, I'm very suspicious of the guy, but that Sun Mars cazimi, I've always said it's not, it's typically benefic. When Mars is in the heart of the sun like that, and even if he's full of it, down the road, even if like Taiwan's invaded next Wednesday, the vibe of that day was very Sun Mars cazimi. Like, yeah, don't worry about it, man. Everything's fine.
But the other thing I'm kind of worried about is in Biden's chart that was happening in the 12th.
Oh yeah, I know. I know. I listen. I'm not like
good for one's enemies. Good for one's nemesis.
Right.
This is not an ideal trend. And actually, that's another thing I'm sort of thinking about is the fact that when Mars ingresses into Sagittarius, that's going to ingress right upon Joe Biden's ascendant.
Mm-hmm.
Because his ascendant is in pretty early
Sagittarius,
early Sagittarius. So that Mars square Saturn is going to be happening really close to, that making that conjunction and square to his ascendant. Do you want to bring that up real quick so we can take a look at that?
Yeah, just a moment here.
Oh, and GF Martello says, Oh, yes. Yeah, I just addressed that.
Yeah, I was
We
following
were on
that.
the same wavelength.
Okay.
Now, this is also kind of an interesting time because this is sort of tracking along with my more uh, long range sort of projection that I've been making with Zadok releasing that the first week of December would be a time where he's kind of like replaying the events of like October 2015, which is when he announced he wouldn't be running in the 2016 election.
Right.
So let's take a look at
So
what's going
this
on.
is his natal chart, and here I'll just do a by will for now. So yeah, the meeting was on Wednesday.
Oh, it's his birthday tomorrow. I didn't even
Oh yeah,
realize.
yeah. That's just what the guy needs, another birthday.
He'll be 81.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
so 84,
so
83, 82, 81. So he's entering a 10th house year.
okay, yeah, yeah. So he's going from Leo to Virgo.
That's
So the
right.
so the
So,
Venus retrograde this summer was in his perfected sign. That's interesting.
yeah, I wasn't really paying too much attention
Mm.
to what he was doing
Um,
in that
well,
for that transit.
right, right. Well, anyway, this is that cazimi in his chart on the day that he met with Xi Jinping, and yeah, Mars is going to be crossing that ascendant very, very soon. How soon? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the Sun will be there by Saturday, and then Mars by like early the following week at the end of the month. Okay.
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 Now I haven't looked back at what he was. Well, wait a sec. So Mars went retrograde in that same part of his chart in late 2016. So he was still vice president at that time.
Yeah, because Trump wasn't inaugurated until January of 2017.
Right. So
When did he meet with? I know he met with Xi Jinping again just like a year ago, almost to the day, when Mars was at retrograde in Gemini. So what are we looking for here?
what I was just curious about is what Joe Biden was doing when Mars was in that part of the zodiac before in 2016.
You mean when it was retrograde over
Uh,
his
well,
ascendant?
and or when it was direct. Just when Mars was back in that same
Yeah,
spot.
here it is in August. This is the third pass over his ascendant, and
Trying to
then and
find.
then it was yeah, it's all here. Made a
There you are.
yeah.
Okay, so I see. So yeah, August of 2016 was when it had station direct and was
Yeah.
moving forward. So what? So this is like around the. This would have been close to the Democratic National Convention.
Yeah. Yeah, which is in
Um,
later in the month in August, right? It's usually like
I
the last week of August, I think, is the Democratic convention, usually. Maybe I'm wrong.
why was this such a big deal for Biden? Um, so the DNC was actually July 25th through July 28th,
Oh, is that right?
2016.
Okay. Okay.
So let's take a look at that. So this is wow, right? So Mars was right on his sun.
Yeah.
And did it ingress into Sagittarius by the end, or was it
But
still in the 12th?
let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, it didn't leave
No,
until
until the
just
second.
after. So what was going on in August of 2016? Because I would think this would be relevant for what's going to happen now. Just remember this that particular retrograde from 2016 is kind of similar to this
Yes,
conjunction.
absolutely. Absolutely. They're
So
totally a pair of some kind. Yeah.
So there should be some relationship to that. So what? Okay, so Joe Biden met with the Turkish Prime Minister on August 25th. He visited Latvia at the end of the month. On August 2nd, 2016, he was at a
Okay.
state lunch for Singapore Prime Minister Lee Long.
So does this mean he's going to declare war on Singapore and Latvia?
No, but
That would be throwing everyone a curve.
I just wonder if this is like a public thing or a private thing that was going on for him.
Yeah, look, I don't know if we're going to solve it here and now.
Sure. Yeah, I was just curious if it would. I mean, I don't really recall exactly what he was doing at the time. Obviously the attention at that time was on Hillary Clinton versus Trump, not Biden. But he was he was still in his office at that time. So
yeah. Well, we've also, I mean, we've been just looking at the end of this month to be sort of a trouble spot for Joe anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true. And even though Mars is crossing the degree of his ascendant, there will still be the whole of the transit really to worry about. Actually, wait a second. Wait.
Oh, those wheels are turning. Oh, those wheels are turning.
So okay, all right. So look at October 11th, 2012 for Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
This was the day he faced off against Paul Ryan.
Okay.
In a vice presidential debate for the 2012 election. And a lot of people said at the time that Biden was extremely, seemingly very invigorated and almost hostile, very on point. As like I mean, I don't remember. This is like from the 2012 election. Obviously, this is like over 10 years ago. But I remember at the time, and I remember like watching it, and seeing how he was sort of characterized as being very aggressive and very sharp, being really not letting his opponent, get away with anything. Kind of a good performance, generally speaking. Certainly
right.
an energetic one from Joe Biden. So I remember seeing that and seeing that Mars was really close to his ascendant and thinking, that definitely is a match. So we are seeing a return potentially of Mars to the ascendant. Now, the fact that Mars is retrograde on its ascendant in the aftermath of the DNC in 2016, I almost wonder if, I mean, I'm kind of speculating here because there's definitely an answer to this, but I'm not, I can't really remember all the details, but I would wonder if perhaps I wonder how Biden was deployed basically as a surrogate for Hillary Clinton. Like, I wonder if he was used more strategically. I know that the Obama White House was a little worried about Biden's tendency to go off script and to kind of be gaffe prone. So the fact that Mars was retrograde in the first and that Saturn was in the first house after the DNC would almost make me think that maybe the White House was deliberately telling him to hold back.
Well, I mean, I kind of, that's my impression is, I mean, Hillary becomes the candidate and it's sort of like,
he was passed over.
Yeah, no, Joe, sit it out, and I believe my recollection is he's instructed to do that, by Obama.
Right.
Yeah.
So that would make sense for him kind of feeling like he was sort of put on the sidelines, with the fact that Mars and Saturn were in his first. But contrast that with October 2012, that's when he's told to kind of go on the attack.
Yeah.
So this is kind of interesting because I wonder then if Mars's ingress then into Sagittarius, we might see the return of a more invigorated kind of Joe Biden. Of course, this time it's Mars square Saturn rather than Mars square Neptune.
Yeah.
So it's like he's invigorated, but like with a kind of harder edge. I mean, I would be concerned that he would uh, um, be prone then to, say, upping the ante with the United States' military operations regarding the Ukraine war, regarding
Yeah.
the Israel-Palestine conflict. Uh, it's hard to say with certainty exactly which way he would go with this, but I think the fact that we have these kind of previous examples of, in one case, him going on the attack with Mars
Hmm.
direct on the ascendant versus a time when he may have been instructed to actually hold back his activities with Mars retrograde on the ascendant. Um, this would then seem to tell us that this upcoming Mars ingress into his first house would be a similar time of him kind of going on the attack in a sense.
Right. Right. Um,
Now, Mercury is the ruler of his year, and that's already in the first. So I'm not sure.
it goes retrograde not long after, though.
That's true.
Yeah.
And then it will go back
Back
into Sagittarius.
into Sagittarius. Yeah.
Will it conjoin Mars?
Uh,
Oh
yeah.
shit.
Yeah. Yep.
Hmm.
Sure will.
Okay, so that means part of what we'll have to look forward to then in December is like a classic Joe Biden gaffe, I
Oh
guess,
yeah.
but
Oh
one
yeah.
potentially that's more like inflammatory or uh
One that,
somehow a bigger problem.
yeah, one that sort of gets him into more trouble than he ever has.
Caroline Marshall says Dark
Dark
Brandon is
Brandon is rising. Yeah. Look, I hope so. I hope so.
I mean, uh yeah. Uh, that's yeah, that's interesting. I love the Dark Brandon meme because it's such stark contrast with the typical sort of Uncle Joe persona he's otherwise had, or fatherly or grandfatherly Joe. And it's interesting too because we again see that distinct difference between Scorpio and Sag. He's a Sag rising, so Jupiter in Cancer is like the ruler of his ascendant. That's why he has this kind of paternalistic, sort of almost cozy or fatherly, paternal kind of
Yeah,
appeal.
when he
You
sniffs
know,
your hair, he's being very
but
fatherly.
but no, but well, I was going to contrast that with the fact that he has that like massive Scorpio stellium in the 12th, and so
Right.
like there's this like other side to him, which is like very not Jupiter, very not Sagittarius, but like instead, well, Dark Brandon, right?
Right.
These we have these two personas of his that one is distinctly Jupiterian and the other is you know, much more Scorpio.
Mercurial. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mercury and Scorpio. Um, yeah. Someone just asked. Sorry, I forgot who just asked about Bow when Bow died. These are the transits for when Bow died, and lo and behold, there's Saturn,
Yeah.
and the Mercury retrograde on his Saturn. So yeah, a whole lot of Saturn going on.
The previous solar eclipse would have occurred in his fifth house of children.
Mm, right.
In general, if we look at the ruler of Biden's fifth house, we can see that that is Mars, his contrary to sec malefic in the 12th house.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so what's interesting about that is not only has he seen the premature deaths of his children, but he also has children who are deeply troubled and have
Yeah.
gotten in trouble with the law. Hunter Biden.
Yeah. I've heard a little something about
Yeah.
that.
The
Yeah.
Republicans have made sure, that's the most important problem in the entire world is, Hunter Biden
Right. Yeah.
problems. But
Nothing's more
nothing is
important
more
than
important than Hunter Biden.
Hunter's laptop. Yeah.
It's the new Benghazi. So yeah, but the other thing I thought was sort of interesting about that as well is the fact that it's the 12th house of enemies, right? And so it's like not only is it that his children have like suffered he's like suffered tragedies that involve children, and that he has a child who has you know has a lot of problems that they're going through, but it also reflects that like his children end up becoming the focus of like attacks from enemies. um and so we kind of see like how, yeah, his opponents have weaponized his child's issues.
Right.
I love that part. I love that one time on Fox News, they they found this clip. They got this leaked clip of Biden's answering machine message, his voicemail message to his son, and they were treating it like it was some smoking gun of like Joe Biden's involvement, and the content of the message is what you would expect to hear from a father who is very
Right. Any father,
any
no matter
father
whether
any
if
father
he's a
who like loves
president or a
who loves their child and is hurting for them. And it's like, how is this you just made him look a lot more human here. This is
yeah.
this is
Yeah.
not
I didn't get that.
this is not the own you think it is.
Well, then of course Margie like just flashed the photo, like the this nude photo of Hunter in Congress.
Yeah.
So you got that going on too. I didn't check the transit.
So
campaign.
yeah, I mean, that's been such a low priority for me. I really,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just a distraction. But I mean, I'm not. I mean, okay, whatever crimes he's committed, he should have to
Yeah.
defend himself for, the same as anyone else. But it's really not that. I just don't care. But
Someone brought cocaine into the White House. We don't know what. I saw it. It was this little
oh
baggie
yeah,
on the shelf in the cupboard. It's this
that's
little.
the first time drugs have ever been in the White House.
Yeah. Right.
That never happened before that at all. But I just think it's really fascinating that Mars is the ruler of Biden's fifth, and those are like some of the specific ways that he has experienced that. And that's really why I think Sagittarius rising really makes so much sense for Joe Biden, because
Oh, for sure.
I mean
For sure.
all the house rulerships really work in that respect. He's someone who, despite his sort of jolly Jupiterian demeanor generally, he's whatever you think of him, he's obviously gone through a lot of serious personal tragedies, and
Yep. And it's there in the chart.
It's
for
there
sure.
in the 12th for sure.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see. I gotta wrap this up.
Okay.
I have clients coming up. But this has been fun as always. We went in a million directions.
Yeah. Sorry, Beth.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, have fun with that one, Beth. Yeah, this is going to be one of those weeks where the subject will be like a million different things. All right. Well, who are you, Watson?
I'm Patrick Watson. I'm an astrologer. You can find me and my work and my services and products at patrickwatsоnastrology.com.
Fantastic. And I am Nick Dagan Best. You can find me at nickdaganbestastrologer.com. And yeah, Patrick and I are both available for all your astrology needs. So come check us out if you're so inclined. And thank you all for tuning in. Of course, I'm going to have my solo live stream tomorrow. So I hope you tune in for that. Same time that this stream began in your local time zone. And Patrick and I will be back next week, whether you're eating turkey or not. Don't you worry. You can come attend our live stream with the drumstick in your hand and all that. You're totally welcome. Or if you're from some country that doesn't celebrate these silly things, you're also welcome. All right. Any last words there, Patrick?
No, happy Thanksgiving to anyone who's celebrating that. And I may or may not have Black Friday deals available for some of my services. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I'll try to.
But don't be stampeding each other going for Patrick's services.
Don't forget about Nick.
Shop safe out there.
Shop safe. Yeah.
All right. Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week. Have yourselves a great one.
Bye.